Hello and welcome back to Oh God, What Now? I'm Andrew Harrison. This edition has been specially edited to take out all potentially offensive comments. So thanks for listening and we'll see you this time next week. We got great reaction from the new vibe on the show. Deep dives at the start of the week, old school topical show on Friday. Lots of people said very kind things about last week's Ultimate AI Explainer with Alex Hearn from The Economist, and there's more like that coming. So if you like what we're doing, remember, we can't do it without you. The support of people like you on Patreon is essential. So if you haven't done so already, please do hit the link in the show notes to help out. On today's edition, we're not even a quarter of the way into Donald Trump's second term as president, but could he change the Constitution, break with all convention, and somehow run for a third term? In typical pot-boiling style, Trump has been teasing supporters and trolling his opponents with a will he, won't he routine over recent months. In May, he said he wouldn't try for a third term. In June, he hinted that he would. And this week's statement, that he would like to but probably won't, doesn't clear up much. Meanwhile, the Trump online store is selling Trump 2028 merchandise. And at that time, the president himself will be 82 years old. Could it happen? How could it happen? We'll be talking over this alarming prospect with Casey Burgat, ex-congressional staffer turned politics professor at George Washington University and host of Mastering the Room, the podcast. Hello, Casey. Nice to meet you. How you doing?
I'm all right. How you doing?
Okay, not bad. I want to ask you, what did you make of Trump's little excursion on the White House roof this week? I mean, do something ridiculous and newsworthy to distract is very much an established bit of the playbook, isn't it?
It definitely is. But me personally, seeing there are things that you choose to pay attention to, and there's things that you don't. Right? You can't fight everything because then you end up fighting nothing. And this is one I'm not wading into. I mean, presidents have long wanted to change the White House from a basketball hoop under Obama to a putting green under Eisenhower. Like, this is a thing. And what Donald Trump does is he builds big things.
Yes, President Grandpa is lost on the roof. Well, something that did get lost in all of the ongoing Trumpism of the week was Robert F. Kennedy's decision to cancel funding for mRNA vaccines for flu, COVID-19 and others. This is $500 million worth of funding. And it comes after he fired the CDC's Immunization Advice Committee and filled it with vaccine skeptics. How is this going down outside the Make America Healthy, anti-vax kind of paranoid community?
It's not going well, right? I mean, this is something where you cut a lot of funding, and this is a lot of funding. There's a ton of projects. This is something that not a lot of Americans follow closely, right? We don't know what they're studying, what they're actually where they're at in their trials. But the signal is the point, right? The actual cutting of this exact type of thing. They promised to do it. This is where the skepticism of RFK and his we'll say science with a lot of quotes around it. This has real impacts, and it's a lot of money going after something that we don't think about, something we take for granted until we actually need them. And that's what vaccines are, right? They move us across something that plagued a previous generation, so they never have to fight those battles. There's plenty of other battles to fight. And so cutting that funding is just an unbelievably short-sighted thing that rallies up a base who doesn't know much about mRNA vaccines anyway. And the science is clear on this, that this is not something that we need to be messing with, because it won't affect us now. It'll affect us 10 years from now when we actually need the things.
But they'll be okay then, because it'll be the Democrats' fault by then. Also joining us from the Oh God, What Now regulars bench, it's Guardian leader writer and, according to ChatGPT, a 17-year-old tennis player from Croatia, Rafael Behr. Hello, Raph. How's your forehand?
Absolutely catastrophically terrible, even in table tennis and badminton and all racket-related sports.
I've got to say, you're looking okay for 17. Thanks, ChatGPT.
Of all the various things I might be presumed to be on the internet, I did not have a young Croatian tennis player, even in the top several hundred.
We can all dream. Let's get a quick dose of UK politics before we go fully USA. First up, Kemi Badenoch has told Amal Rajan at the BBC that she once stood up during an exam and accused her fellow pupil of cheating, and the kid got expelled from school. This seems like a new and novel way to make herself dislikable. Even GB News said she was a grass. I actually had unexpected sympathy for her because I actually do hate cheats like that. But why would you say this in public if you want to be popular and Prime Minister?
I know, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, yeah, snitches get stitches. It is the mantra for a reason. Look, I also have a certain amount of sympathy. I think, she's obviously a very diligent, hardworking person, and that's what she wants to project. And she feels the visceral injustice of someone cheating and maybe wanted to project that. But look, we all know the code of the playground, right? You just don't do that sort of stuff. And I think it is likely to. Okay, let me put it another way. I think this is one of these test cases where that demonstrate how reaching for authenticity is such a sort of a false trail in nearly all cases in politics. It's a word that's used all the time. People want someone to be authentic, but there's no point in trying to be authentic if you are authentically something that people don't particularly like very much. And I do think that is ultimately Kemi Badenoch's biggest problem. And it comes, throughout this interview, there are other things she said. I mean, I had a lot of sympathy with the view that she gave that she lost her faith in God after the Fritzl case, the Austrian psychopathic sex offender who kidnapped and molested his own daughter for sort of a quarter of a century. And it was a really interesting point she was making, and I could understand. I thought it was actually it was honest and candid and emotionally quite resonant. And yet when it became, she started talking about how previously she'd prayed for good exam results and she'd prayed for the bus to come, and it just the framing of it suddenly made it sort of all about her and her earnestness. And I thought, yeah, she's really, you can see she's laying it all out there in a way that's just trying to say, look, notice who I am. I'm a contoured, nuanced human being. Just I need a set of second audience with the British public. And I sort of worry on her behalf that even if it cuts through, it's just not in a way that's going to endear her to the audience that she needs.
Yeah, it's just like, yep, still weird, still strange. What is this, by the way, that we're hearing about Andy Burnham having ideas about finding a seat as the next stage of his invisible plan? What's Morgan McSweeney going to be thinking about that?
Well, yeah, this really caught my eye. We should definitely start by saying the source for this appears to be the Guido Fawkes website, which I'm not going to say
is
the most reputable instrument of information in UK politics. But the rumor is that Andy Burnham would be interested in getting a safe seat, and there might be one available. Andrew Gwynn, who's a Labour MP who's been suspended under investigation for some pretty unpleasant, fruity remarks that he posted in a WhatsApp group. So if there's a by-election there's a seat vacant. Look, what this really comes down to is a creeping realization across the Labour Party and the sort of wider left firmament that Keir Starmer's popularity ratings can't afford to stay in this sort of oxygenless, freezing kill zone for that much longer. I mean, people can keep saying, oh, it's a long time before the next general election, it's midterm, they're doing hard things, they have to wait to see whether some of the benefits of choices that have been made start to come through. But the reality is, a leader who goes to the place that he's gone, where the air is that thin, the organs start to shut down at some point, and possibly you can't come back. And I think we're probably a maximum of 18 months away from the point where a lot of Labour people seriously start saying, yeah, we need to fight the general election under a different leader. And this is, I just think, another flicker of that, and it's just going to build and build unless something changes.
I don't think I've heard John Krakauer's into thin air used as a political analogy before, but I guess it works. Listeners, before we get started, some things that are coming up. The news that's just broken at the end of the week that we're recording about Netanyahu's plan for the IDF to occupy Gaza City and drive out the remaining population, it's obviously hugely shocking, and it's a major escalation. And we didn't really feel we could do it justice on this edition. So this time next week, we've scheduled a full expert-led episode on Israel, Gaza, the wider Middle East, and the humanitarian and political consequences of this nightmare period. So keep an ear out for that. Meanwhile, if you do need a respite from politics, and who doesn't, you could try our new companion podcast, Talk 90s to Me with Miranda Sawyer, which is going from strength to strength. The new episode is out right now, and it dives into the mosh pit to look at the astonishing story of Nirvana, mad, plaid, and dangerous to know. Just follow the link in the show notes to listen, follow, and subscribe. The 22nd Amendment to the US Constitution expressly forbids anybody from running for a third term as president. But the amendment isn't actually that old. It was only ratified in 1951 after FDR ran for 4 terms and there had been a war on. That seemed to be the end of it, except that Trump has a record for defying the courts and ignoring the Constitution, from defying Supreme Court rulings to politicising the justice system. This, however, an extra term, will be the most audacious move of all. He'd either have to change the Constitution or somehow suborn the entire electoral system to ignore it. Either way, it will be a watershed for American democracy. Casey, let's start with the basic question. Why is he floating this? Is it a serious proposition for power? Or is it just messaging to MAGA that, we are in total control and we will remain so forever?
You always, in any type of political story, and this is obviously a key example of that, you have to ask, why are they saying this now? And why are they saying this now? Right? And so right now, there's a lot of headwinds against Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Right after they passed the one big beautiful bill, now the more and more polling that comes out, the more and more the people learn about the bill, the less popular not only his signature piece of legislation is, but Elon Musk, to say nothing of the drip, drip, drip of the Epstein scandal. There's a lot going on and not much of it is good. So you need something else. You need a distraction. And as we talked about with his ballroom, this is probably another version of that, where they just throw some red meat over here that they know isn't a real plausible opportunity until it becomes one, right? Until they convince themselves that it is. And it just distracts from all that other stuff that they don't want to be talking about. And this isn't the first time they've floated the ignoring of the 22nd, the Trump third term. They've had merchandise up. It's a popular thing. So this serves multiple purposes for the president. Distraction, for one, keeps his name in the news cycle. And if we know anything about Donald Trump, he doesn't hate that part of it. Plus, it just it associates him with power while still pissing off Democrats. That's hitting for the cycle if you're on the MAGA side of the story here.
Is there an extent to which also on that last point, if you, and I don't know how sort of much strategy to project onto Trump, because a lot of it might just be sort of happen almost sort of spontaneously, automatically. It might be sort of intuitive, but where if you can sort of provoke the Democrats, to arguing about legalism and constitutionalism, that actually supports the kind of MAGA argument that sort of the sort of Führer principle, basically, which is no, all power and all legitimacy just flows from the character of Donald Trump. And if these people start having slightly nerdy, wonky conversations about constitutional amendments, that's a sort of elite discourse, and that actually, in a perverse way, actually delegitimizes them.
Yeah, exactly right. Like the more that you even have to debate something, it signals that there's a debate to be had, right? And so this is just a constant flowing. Plus, this is right out of the Trump playbook too, is that they love trial balloons that are jokes until they're not, right? And so they throw this out from 2025 to mass deportations, and then all of a sudden it just becomes part of the platform. And you have enough people, including within Congress, who can use their positions of powers to raise that legitimacy. And then you start having really different debates. So not only is it Supreme Court cases that we're going to have with the 22nd Amendment to find loopholes or justifications, but there's a lot of MAGA Republicans that would love to be the first one to file the amendment that would change the Constitution in favor of this. So there isn't that constitutional debate. It's a joke until it's not. And this is the one I fear that's going to be the same case.
Just one other thought on that. I do find it interesting that not that long ago, it seems to me, that the Constitution was a sacred text also for radical right-wing Republicans, if it was the case of the right to bear arms or the power of the states against big government. Why? I mean, it is so much of this is extraordinary, but the fact that constitutionalism as a principle for organizing American politics has now become this sort of footling, pathetic thing, is it as shocking to you on the inside as it seems to me looking at it from the outside, that it can be that much just an instrument of political gameplay, as you've just described?
Yes, it's incredibly frustrating, but this is when I recognize that I am a swamp rat, right? Like I've been around this so much that the hypocrisy, let's just say the convenience of interpretations really depends. And we see this not only on the right to bear arms, but equal rights to vote, like all of these things, the sacred text that it is, it's sacred unless I disagree with it. Then we either need to change or make use of the ambiguity within the document. And it is riddled with ambiguity, which allows for these types of debates to happen. Or we need to outright start changing it or ignoring it. So yeah, the hypocrisy runs deep, but this has been true for both parties for a long time, that they are convenient. They have convenient morals or convenient interpretations of the document. But as Trump and his right wing is want to do, like they will take that convenience, warp it, and then make it faster and more aggressive than anything we've seen before.
Raph, what do you think when you see kind of Trump dodging and weaving on this and sort of like, saying, one thing one week, one thing another? He does it on absolutely every aspect of policy, on every aspect of culture. And it's almost as if the kind of main thoughts are, A, how can I effectively troll the maximum number of people? And B, how can I just remain at the center of the conversation, which we are playing right into on this podcast?
Well, yeah, it's inevitable, isn't it? It's that classic problem where, when you want to say everyone stop taking the bait, by definition, you've then also taken the bait because you're having that same conversation. I mean, again, I don't sort of inhabit the American political tradition in the same way that Casey does. But the one observation I have on this is that you can't really separate Trump's rise to the position he has now from his journey through the entertainment industry. And although there's a clear sort of political nationalistic project that's rooted in all sorts of sort of philosophical ideas about the American history and race, tariffs, class, economics, all that apparatus is there and it's sort of buttressing him. Ultimately, he is a sort of a creature of showbiz. And I think he really does like to keep people guessing and have people paying attention to him. And this really struck me, that awful scene, the sort of the White House bullying conversation with Zelensky, with him and Vance, and they were sort of pushing Zelensky into, and there was that perverse, horrendous confrontation that they had earlier this year. And at the end of it, Trump goes, well, that's going to make great telly. I can't remember what the exact phrase was. And you realize, I think, that point about trolling, it's not just trolling, it's almost sort of generating, he's got a natural sense of the rhythm of television and media. So he's creating a kind of a season finale. It's a cliffhanger. He's saying, you have to keep paying attention to find out what I'm going to do next. And I see it more in that idiom than as in sort of normal political strategic terms.
Well, it's the rhythm of a very particular kind of TV, isn't it? It's Real Housewives. It's basically fights in restaurants TV. It's kind of like set up, sort of a pointless but clearly contrived piece of conflict just to get the eyeballs glued there, and that's where your government flows from. Casey, one of the nightmares of the Trump era is, as you say, it's a joke until it isn't. We keep having to look at crazy and dangerous ideas and then go, yeah, but what would happen? How would they do it? How could they do it? And I know Dorian, who's one of our regulars on the podcast, he's enraged by this. Stop asking, well, how would you go about invading Canada? Don't even give it, the credence of that. I mean, this is a central constitutional question. If you start with the more plausible plan A, that Trump has to get the Republicans to amend the Constitution, don't you need a 2/3 majority to do that, of which they're like way short?
You do. You need a 2/3 of each chamber in Congress, which we know is really tough to do. Plus, then you need 3/4 of state legislatures to go out and ratify that. And so it's a hard thing to amend the Constitution, which is why we've only done it 27 times since 1787. And 2 of those were with alcohol, right? Like we took it out, we put it back in. So it's really, the barrier for this is incredibly difficult, which would require a lot of Democrats within Congress to agree with it and Democratic state legislatures to help pass this. So this is why they're talking about reinterpretation rather than the cleanest route, which is obviously to amend the 22nd.
Yeah, the clock is ticking on midterms anyway, isn't it? It's unlikely the majority will change enormously. We're only 18 months away from midterms.
Yeah, exactly. The clock's always ticking on a midterm. And this one, I mean, we have historically small margins within Congress in both chambers. And so I can't even picture a world where you can get kind of the FDR size majorities where you have 2/3 of every chamber. You have a running majority within state legislatures across the country. I just don't see it given our era right now.
Nosing around, I found that the 27th Amendment, which is something to do with payment of federal employees, took 202 years to ratify.
Correct. It was part of, we think of like the Bill of Rights, the top 10. It was actually a list of hundreds that got whittled down. And one of the 12 that were presented to the state legislatures was what ultimately became the 27th Amendment. So what's old is new again.
So it's shit, we forgot to do this one. It fell down the back of the settee in the Oval Office or something.
Yeah, exactly. They dusted that baby off when they said that it's just members can't raise their own pay during their own Congress, which makes sense. And it made sense when Madison was thinking about it too. And here we are, 27th.
Right. So, I mean, under normal rules, you just kind of, pretty much gone, oh, there you go, end of podcast. He can't do it. But the rules are not normal. And, you just described how certain people would absolutely love to be the first person to pop up with an amendment or a reinterpretation. But there's also a slightly more disturbing idea that the MAGA movement creates the impression of a national clamour for this, either by pet media or social media or faked media or straight up intimidation. I mean, can you imagine trying to hold back a change like this when there's a January the 6th happening outside your state capital?
Oh boy. That to me isn't the next plausible scenario. Like the conversation Raph and I were having about this being legitimized by smart people who probably know better, but they want to curry favor in some sort of movement is kind of the reinterpretation of that text itself. So they're saying that there's a loophole there, saying that let's just read it. In fact, the 22nd Amendment, it's pretty clear. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. And what they're really hanging their hat on is the elected part, right? That there's a loophole saying that maybe he doesn't need to be elected, that he can be reinstalled later. Maybe JD Vance resigns, he gets popped up. That's the interpretation that I've seen people with law degrees attached to their name start to legitimize. And again, this is where we're in a debate that we should never be having in the first place, but here we are.
So it's like you're in the realm of it depends what you mean by the word is. That kind of thing.
What's your definition of is?
Raph, I mean, even if these kind of machinations fail, and even if a constitutional amendment obviously dies, and even if a lot of kind of legal chicanery fails, Trump kind of wins anyway, doesn't he? Because he pops up and says, well, the deep state robbed you of your chance to choose me. It just reinforces the narrative.
Well, I think win is the really significant operative term.
Depends
Not
what
in
you
a
mean by
sense.
win.
Yeah, it depends no, but Trump has an absolute horror of being perceived as a loser and weak. And I think, going back to what we were saying a moment ago about why he might be doing this, and you can sort of overinterpret and think there's more rationality to it than there is. But an element of it is probably just sniffing around to see how available it is. Because if he thinks it can't happen, he'll just stop talking about it, because we wouldn't want to sort of do the gambit that then fails. But as soon as he thinks it is available, then you can start pushing it forward. And so I suspect there's an element of thinking, if he can get away with it, why the hell not? And if he can't, then yes, there's another way of configuring it so that he said, look, I've completed my mission. I've led you to the promised land. I've done everything you wanted. I can just stand down and go back to Mar-a-Lago and have lots of money and get rich, So he will calibrate it in those terms. What he definitely won't want to do is sort of go over the top and then be shot down and be seen to have not delivered something he wanted to do.
I've sat around kind of, nightmare scenarioing and red teaming this and thinking, what ways could it possibly happen? And the biggest force around it seems to be just the base loyalty of MAGA. That they're loud, they've got the TV, they've got the social media, and they've got violence, which the opposition doesn't have. The other thing you can usually depend on is the kind of cowardice and flakiness of Democrats, who will often just roll over or just say, well, we need to listen to, the points of the other side. Can either of you, Casey or Raph, see a situation where enough members of the wider American political establishment feel that they sort of have to let him at least go on the ballot paper just out of clamour?
No.
Thank God for that.
I mean, the one thing I would add to this, just because I think it's relevant more broadly to how this kind of movement operates, is what is motivating them apart from, by them, I mean the people around the president and Trump himself, apart from liking power, the fact that power gives you opportunities to get rich, it's going to be their own fear, which is that obviously if you are removed from power because you have done lots of illegal things and the corruption is absolutely out of control, an awful lot of people, if you actually got a Democrat president and a Democrat Congress and you had a post-MAGA world where actually the laws and the Constitution are broadly in place and the courts are still functioning, those people are going to go to jail, right? So they have a very, very powerful incentive to do absolutely everything within their power to not surrender the levers that they have at the moment. Now, that doesn't mean, and I think Casey's probably right and he understands these things better than me. That doesn't mean they can make it happen by that means, but certainly everything else, trying to coerce the media, trying to do everything to construct the sort of the Victor Orbanization of American democracy in such a way that although you have a sort of a Potemkin apparatus of elections and constitutional law, the cultural impetus is so powerful that somehow you just still have MAGA rule after the next presidential election. That seems to me they will be putting an awful lot of energy into that just for self-preservation reasons.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the kind of the Republican Party and MAGA after Trump a little bit after a pause in the middle of the pod. But I wanted to ask you, Casey, you mentioned the idea of Vance running possibly with Trump as vice president candidates, or vice presidential candidate. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because again, sounds kind of outlandish. And it does sort of presume as well that by the time of the next election, there's still enough in the tank in MAGA to carry a Vance Trump ticket over the line.
Yeah, exactly. So the coordination, number one, is a big deal. Then you got to educate the entire public on what the actual gambit is. And if we know anything about people, especially the folks who show up in presidential elections that decide it, there's a small portion of them that you have to make them pay attention so much that they show up and vote when otherwise they wouldn't do it. And so there's a ton of education that goes on when you're talking about this type of gambit where, so let's say Vance runs as president, Trump is his VP, and then all of a sudden he resigns. This is his loophole way around it. Or you leave him off the ballot at all, you install him as Speaker of the House, and then they both resign. Think of how much power you would have to give up for a J.D. Vance or anyone else to escalate there. And here I take comfort in actually the ambitions of politicians, right? That if you are you so willing to sacrifice your place to not hold an elected office, especially if you were one that they were considering for the highest office in the land. We just don't see that happening. That's not to say it never could, whatever. What are we talking about anymore? But no, just the level of coordination that would have to happen to not only install this as an acceptable, legitimate way of installing a president against the obvious intent of the 22nd Amendment, then you have to tell voters that this is what you're doing too. And I just think you're too far down the rabbit hole on convincing people this is the right or legitimate thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of the precedent would be Dmitry Medvedev being president so Putin could be prime minister. And that's a totally different political system, a totally different political culture. Can I ask you a question, Casey, actually, about, because the step before that, obviously, is the midterms. And we're sort of obsessed with the presidency. But if the MAGA movement and the Republicans want to sort of rip the guts out of the functionality of American democracy and turn it into a sort of an empty shell which they can just fill with sort of monolithic nationalism, the time to do that is actually the midterms next year, and that's coming around quite soon. And election laws done at state level, there are all sorts of obstacles to that. There's been talk about redistricting. I mean, what's your current estimation in how free and fair those elections are actually going to be, and how confident we can be that will be a bit of a natural kind of a thermostatic correction in American democracy?
I am confident in it. This is where the bureaucracy and the federalism you talked about of all these states having their own laws of how to run even congressional elections, I take comfort in that there would have to be so much systematic change across 50 states, 3 more territories to affect the results of this. This is a thermostatic change, and our biggest indication of how scared Trump and the MAGA Republicans are is how much we're talking about redistricting, how much they're looking to change the actual districts to run these elections in, rather than outright changing the elections and who will ultimately serve to carry on this MAGA movement. I think they see the writing on the wall, just like history suggests they should, right? The out party of an unpopular president with some economic headwinds against them, they're going to face losses, even in a polarized era. We saw it in 2010, we saw it in 2018, we saw it in 2022, that these unpopular administrations get slapped back the next opportunity they have, and that's the midterms coming up. And they're trying to do everything they can to minimize that historical damage that we're predicting, but outright changing 50 states election laws to just say these don't matter anymore, we're going to use different unfree and unfair elections, there's not enough competency there to get it done across the board.
Is there a tension there naturally between, if you're a sitting Republican congressman, who are you more scared of? The kind of your MAGA hardcore literally in your district who know where you live, or the wider electorate who could remove you? It seems to me those two things might apply slightly different pressures on how you behave going into the midterms.
100%. And this is why we need to be more specific of Republican member. Are you in a safe seat? Or are you in a competitive seat? And the reality is fewer than 10% of House seats, fewer than 40 are actually competitive, meaning that the other 400, we know exactly who's going to win independent of that candidate. We know exactly which party is going to win, whether they run a dead animal or a functional candidate, right? And so those incentive structures, depending on where you sit, are completely different. If you're one of those few competitive seats, you're going to try to walk that fine line of attaching yourself to Trump, but not be targeted on your next true social to get through the primary. But if you are in an uncompetitive election, which is the vast majority of these things, and what districting in Texas is trying to recreate and a lot more seats, you are pandering. You are going full right. That your whole election is within the 13 to 14 eligible % of voters who will decide the primary, who then you'll just run roughshod in the general. So again, painting with the broad brush is not helpful, but that's why we see different types of talking points from, even though they have R next to their name, they're going to talk about these things completely different because they know who their voters ultimately will choose their fate.
Well, you just mentioned Texas. What the hell is going on there? The Democrats have kind of gone on the lam so that there's not a quorum to this redistricting, and the FBI have been sent to find them.
I mean, yes, that's what happened, right? There's a redistricting proposal within Texas because the state legislature decides who draws those, or they decide the lines in congressional districts there. Trump said that he was told, and then he said that we can find upwards of 5 more seats if we just redraw these lines, if we use the power technically afforded to us. Obviously, that would be a huge boon for them heading into a tough midterm election year where it's going to be tight anyway. And then Democrats, because to prevent them from changing those or passing the law that would change those district boundaries, they need a quorum. You need enough people within the state legislature to carry out your business. And Democrats, recognizing this is the business they want to carry out, they hightailed it to Illinois. They literally left to prevent them from having a quorum, to prevent them from redrawing these congressional districts. And now they're using the power of not only state offices, but federal offices to try to get these state legislators back so that Texas can then start to redraw the districts in favor of Trump.
This is like Thelma and Louise.
And it's not new, by the way. This is the only time this ever happened. I know it's dominating the time now, but this is what you get. And so Democrats are trying to make the case like we are not just obstructing for obstructing's sake, but this is actually, we are leaving the powers of our office behind so that they can't be overtaken by a majority within Texas. We're down the rabbit hole. This is Alice in Wonderland type stuff.
Well, before we take a bit of a break, Raph, do you know what the most disturbing aspect of this whole thing is? I've discovered via the American Friction guys on their podcast, it's actually pronounced gerrymandering. We've been saying it wrong for years. It's not gerrymandering.
It was gerrymandering.
It's gerrymandering.
I refuse to accept that.
It's
Fake
Gary
news.
Halliwell.
I got more nerdy details for you if you need them, but that's true.
Time for a quick breather after all of that. As I mentioned, we got a lot of good feedback on last week's Ultimate AI Explainer edition, and artificial intelligence is the gift that keeps on taking. In fact, whenever you oppose the latest innovation, you're often characterised as a Luddite. So this week, The Bunker took a look at the original Luddites and whether they might actually have had a good point. Here's Alex von Tunzelman talking to Brian Merchant, author of Blood in the Machine, The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech. Follow the link in the show notes to hear the full episode.
Would you consider that the Luddites ultimately won or lost?
Yeah, that's a good question. They lost the battle, and whether or not they won the war is still an open question. It is true that the specific, material Luddite rebellion, the people who rose up and were doing the machine breaking themselves were undeniably rounded up and hung by the dozen at York Castle and elsewhere. Many were transported to Australia, where, it might be noted, a sort of a strong tradition of cultural Lettism sort of took root, but I digress. They planted a lot of seeds like that. So it's not a pure digression. They planted seeds in culture. They inspired folks like Lord Byron and Percy Shelley, and most importantly, perhaps, Mary Shelley, who takes some of the themes of Lettism and writes them into Frankenstein and warns us about those sort of reckless masters of technology and capital who can produce things and unleash them onto a populace that has no real recourse against them. And so these critiques endure. Beyond that, we have sort of seeds planted in the reform movement and then inaugurating future sort of class struggles with owners who deploy technology. So there were a lot of there's this constellation of what you would call victories and this footprint, this cultural footprint that's left by the Luddites that I don't think we can deny is impactful, even inspiring, and did in fact change the course of history, and particularly labor history. And, maybe Lettism wasn't successful, but then other things were down the line, abolishing child labor or getting protections on the lengths of the working day and workplace protection, all these kind of things.
Right, let's pull the camera back a little and imagine that Donald Trump is not going to be president for all time. Not even all that spray tan can keep a man alive forever. Trump is not immortal, but how much longevity is there in MAGA, the movement he rode to power, and in the new Republican Party, which he's fully transformed into the Donald Trump support system? Who could succeed Trump? How long can you keep on making America great again? And what happens to personality cults when the central personality disappears? Casey, the MAGA movement is already quite diverse in its way. You've got the Stephen D. Miller, J.D. Vance kind of nationalist, populist, blood and soil types who hate the elites. You've got the Marjorie Taylor Greene anti-woke culture warriors. You've got Christian nationalists. You've got deep state conspiracy people, libertarian Muskites, and that's before the Nazis. You've got like literally everybody. I mean, is Trump the only thing that's holding them together?
He's definitely their biggest piece of adhesive, right? Like he is the vehicle for a lot of these factions who have really intense interests about certain things. He's the big umbrella that brings them together and gives them a legitimate opportunity for power, right? Not only in congressional majorities, but at state legislatures. Like he's the uniting factor. And the irony of ironies is that he doesn't care about policy that much at all, right? Like he is their name. He is their access to the ballot. He is their access to power and legitimacy. But he is willing to let people care about what they care about and write the laws, message in certain ways. But he is he's the unifier. He's the straw that stirs the drink.
But I mean, the contradictions in there. You've got people who are anti-elites and people who literally are the elites and are trying to shore up the elites and are trying to dissolve our idea of democracy. You've got Christian fundamentalists. You've got people who are, I think it would be charitable to say, opposed to Christian values. You've got culture warriors and people who don't believe in traditional scientific method. Once you pull away that piece of the Jenga at the bottom, is there anything that can hold them together?
I don't know. I mean, it would have to take, just like all campaigns are led by charismatic people who people see themselves in or are able to use as a vehicle. And right now, that's why they've really struggled without Trump, including after he lost a presidential election that resulted in a full-on insurrection of the Capitol. You would think that would be enough to find someone else, that you get the Trump issues or you get the Trump messaging without the actual Trump chaos. And they've tried several times, even now, if not outright explicitly, to move on from him. And they haven't yet. And so then you just see the downstream effects where this is what's different than the first time of like, let's not try to tap dance our way through. Let's not try to calm his worst instincts. Let's lean into him and let's use him as a vehicle if we're going to actually use him as a vehicle. And they've struggled to find the successor. Not unlike Democrats, by the way, just in completely different terms. This is a hard thing to go from. If you have someone as an outright standard bearer for your party, it is really hard to move on from. And history suggests that they're going to actually really struggle to find anyone that's doing an imitation, a cheap imitation of that. And that's what I'm interested to see after this midterm, especially, is that 2028 is coming around the corner, right? And we're going to have almost half the Senate is going to run for the presidency. And you're going to have to find your lane, including with a president who presumably will still be there, who's very reluctant to point to someone else and say, he can do it just as good as I can. And that's what I'm interested to see is how do you distinguish yourself? How do you find your line while still keeping Trump, the possibility of the Trump endorsement alive? It's going to be a tough challenge for all of them.
Well, it's interesting that you raised that idea of, what if we had a Trump but without the chaos? Because that was kind of trotted out towards the end of his first term. The idea that somehow if you got like a more professional Trump, you got like Trump Pro Edition or whatever, that would somehow be more functional and more useful and, upgrade. But even from this side of the Atlantic, we can tell the chaos is the force field that enables it all to happen. The chaos is the reason that conventional politics finds it hard to lay a glove on Trump. It's the fact that he does not play by the rules. He doesn't even obey the kind of rules of political physics. So by definition, if you're trying to find a pro-level Trump, you're not getting a Trump, are you?
No, you're not. But there's trade-offs to everything. And that chaos was the reason they lost in 2020. Right? Like he had an absolute case to make for re-election right there, but it was the chaos that people were exhausted of that ultimately led to his defeat in a situation that history would suggest would be a rallying cry for the incumbent. So it can cut both ways.
Well, I mean, this is exactly the thing that I felt most strongly looking back at it in that election that Trump lost. And I'm not even going to do scare quotes for lost because he genuinely really did lose. But it shouldn't have even been close. And I think it was clear from then. And I think this goes back to your original question, Andrew, like what is the potential longevity of Trumpism, MAGA politics? If there'd been a really clear understanding of what he represented to the constitutional republic of the United States, it wouldn't have been close. And after January the 6th, there would have been such an outpouring of democratic soul searching by everyone, and the Republicans would have been contrite. None of that really happened. Certainly didn't last very long when it did happen. And that does make me think, look, let's separate out two things. The sort of showbiz Trump personality, the fact that he was in Home Alone 2 and he's just been on telly forever, and he can produce things in the popular American imagination that perhaps no other politician could have done, and he's sui generis, right? There's that. But there's also, is a sort of kleptocratic crony capitalist nationalism a sustainable political model for a country with the power and economic heft and the military might of the United States? Of course it is. I mean, that could go on for quite a long time. And so I think, the way I see it, and I'd be really interested to know if Casey agrees or disagrees with this analysis, I can really see two sort of bigger issues that are going to sort of puncture MAGA as a political project. And it's not just the ideological contradictions. One is, the economy. If the big beautiful bill ramps up the deficit so much and the tariffs fail comprehensively to bring in any revenue, and you actually start to lose credibility in the dollar on international markets, you get a financial crisis of such epic proportions that hits when Trump is still there, and it's very obvious that he's completely detonated the US economy on a scale that hasn't been seen for 100 years. That's a problem. And the other one is this fundamental thing that is true of all extreme nationalist politics, which is you have to always be simplifying, saying there aren't real contradictions, there aren't trade-offs. All different social political groups can just align in the will of me, the great leader who embodies the needs of the people. That necessarily drives you to simplistic policy solutions that don't work. And then when they fail, you need to find scapegoats and people to blame for why it's gone wrong. And that leads you either to start wars with other people or to really aggressively target dissent in your own country. And that then the democracy completely implodes. And so those are the two things that I think either before 2028 or shortly afterwards, if the Republicans somehow keep the White House, that's the track that they're going down. And those will be the things that bring it down properly.
Amen. Well said. To the two fronts. On the economy front, I agree with you that these big picture things, I don't think it will be the deficit. If you ask an average American, they will tell you we have a ton of it, but I have no idea what it is, let alone how it impacts me every single day. And then the tariffs, I don't know. It's on an ideological front anyway. You love them because they're Trumps if you love Trump, and you hate them if you don't, even though you couldn't pass a test on them, right? I don't think it's those things. What I do think the economy will do, it'll be the inflation, it'll be wages, it'll be all those key indicators that affect kitchen table issues. Plus, we'll have some effects of that one big, beautiful bill where it will actually hurt populations that voted for Trump because it'll start affecting their benefits or make them more uncertain. And uncertainty causes chaos, and then we start going to give me more certainty out there. And then on the other side, the nationalistic front, I think that there's a huge case to make. Like, you're right, all your history suggests that it'll rise to more authoritarian movement, and that gives them an incentive structure to quiet dissent. We start to see some of this stuff within the United States too. But at some point, the blame them and if they have a fundamental lack of true progress on these campaign promises that now go back to 2016, right? If they prove to be incapable of advancing some of those things, I think you're just going to start peeling off of people who will just get tired of the same message. It grows tiresome, right? And this goes back to the original question of, is it Trump or is it Trumpism, right? He is so good at making you pissed about the same things for a decade. I think that people will really struggle if and when we get past Trump to carry on that same exact message and be able to convince people over and over and over the same things. The same people are to be blamed. The same deep state can be the same problem. The same won't work when it's not Trump doing the same thing. So that's what I'm looking for. I think you're right on the money, Raph, heading in. Chaos will always affect people's votes, and a huge economic bubble. Yeah, we've seen it before. Hopefully we don't see it again, but there's a lot of indicators out there saying it may be on the horizon here.
I would add one tiny thought to the end of that as well, which is also thinking about it. He has quite a strong incentive if he doesn't get a third term, for it all to fall apart immediately after he's gone. I mean, the kind of après-moi le déluge is like, it was all great when I was in charge, and as soon as these other idiots, he doesn't care about the Republican Party. So literally, even if it's a Republican president, as soon as that other loser took over, everything went to shit, because like, I'm
he
the only
crashed
guy
the
who could have
boat
done
I
it.
built him.
Yeah, well, all of history's greatest monsters, Margaret Thatcher, Sir Alex Ferguson, that's what they did. You know, exactly the same thing. Casey, you gave me an idea for a slogan for the Democrats in 2028. Is America great yet? And just a picture of like working people looking at their watches going, are we great yet? You've been telling us for years.
Not bad. I'll kick it to some folks.
Now, let's make some stickers. Bringing it back to the very, very immediate near future, just like people who might carry this horrible torch. I mean, you know, J.D. Vance is clearly the what Trump calls the probably favoured candidate. Rubio's possible, but everybody from Sarah Huckabee Sanders to Ted Cruz, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, they've all been mentioned. Without trying to pick a winner, will you please pick a winner?
Pass. No, you're going to see some ambitious folks really start to show their colors a little bit. And J.D. Vance is an interesting cat because he is incredibly ambitious. He has he can be in any room and convince himself of exactly what he's saying. And that gets tiring for a lot of people they're going to have to impress, to say nothing of a Secretary of State and a sitting president, an outgoing lame duck president. I think J.D. Vance is the front runner, but I think a lot is going to change. And you're going to see people's names pop out of the woodwork on very, very high divisive issues they know aren't going anywhere in positions of power. You're going to see governors take some actions. You're going to see sitting senators introduce some bills that are just beneath the chamber. And it's going to be a long cycle. Plus, we already see people popping up right now, right? They're getting precinct captains. They're starting leadership committees. There's going to be so much money that people are going to be outright exhausted and disgusted by the time this thing's over. And we haven't even got to the midterms yet.
But also, I mean, in normal times, which I guess is just like distant prehistory, like the, you know, the Jurassic period or whatever. But in normal times, you kind of, you know, 2 years into the second term, it's gearing up properly and a fight is starting to happen for succession. But that's with presidents who aren't as jealous and thin-skinned and controlling as Trump. He seems to have the idea that only that he will personally select the successor. It's going to be a case of waiting for the medieval king to nominate you rather than a conventional primary series. So presumably that changes everybody's calculus rather than jumping up and saying we need a whole new Republican Party.
Yeah, it does. And it delays them being explicit about their intentions, and it makes them, and it's incentivizing them to just be proximity to Trump is a powerful thing, but you can't cross him ever, right? Like you can do 99 pro-Trump things. And if the last thing you do is the one that isn't, you're out. You're out for now, at least, right?
Or even the third thing you did out of 99. I mean, because this guy is world champion grudge holder.
Exactly. That's what I mean. And his endorsement and the power of his endorsement really matters, especially in those primary circles where it will ultimately matter. So we might see that delay people being explicit about their intentions, right? Not being outright saying I'm running for president. You'll see a ton of considerations. I'm having chats with my family. No, it's not a consideration at this time, with the at this time being the huge emphasis. So again, there have been people who have been sitting on the sidelines waiting for Trump to get his ass kicked in 2016, in 2020, now in 2024. There's a huge backlog of folks who have huge ambitions. And the party that they would have ran for in 2016, including Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, this ain't that party anymore. They've shifted, but they're going to have a lot of baggage knowing that the internet doesn't forget exactly what they said, but that hasn't seemed to matter in them currying favor within the Trump administration since then.
But what you just said about the Republicans, then I realized when I was asking you about the Republican Party, that it was the first time we'd mentioned it in this podcast. We'd only talked about Trump, MAGA, his various sub-tribes. That, I mean, the idea of what the Republican Party used to be is now so relegated in the pecking order of what matters. Is there a meaningful Republican Party anymore? Or is it just a kind of shell that some kind of post-Trump thing will occupy?
It's evolved. I mean, there's no denying that it's evolved. They still have some what we used to call like Reagan Republicans in them, but they're few and far between, right? They're retiring from office. They're looking for other positions of power that doesn't have to be so closely tied to Trump's approval rating today. Or they've been outright kicked out of their own parties for not being sufficiently conservative, right? And this is what we've seen, including Senator Bill Cassidy, who's my neighbor on Capitol Hill. Like he's a very conservative voice. He's not MAGA necessarily, but he's a very conservative voice from Louisiana. That is a very conservative state. He voted against the second Trump impeachment, and the state party of Louisiana kicked him out of that Republican Party. We saw this across in Utah with Mitt Romney. We saw it with Bob Corker. There's the growing list. So to say that the old Republican Party, I think we should probably stop saying that. It's evolved past that. There is a Republican Party. It is dominated by Trump. It is dominated by Trump supporting folks, and there is factions within that, to be sure. But it is the core base is MAGA through and through.
Raph, I mean, we've just seen with the British Conservative Party what a Pyrrhic victory can look like. You take kind of total power on the back of your big idea, Brexit or Make America Great Again, and you purge your party and you completely remake yourself, but it just sort of destroys you as an intellectual force. And, you know, the absolute caning that the Conservative Party took at the last general election may not actually be their worst ever result. The next one may be even worse. They're showing no signs of resurrecting. They kind of look a bit doomed. Do you think there's a potential scenario like that for the Trumpified Republicans? Because this kind of power lends itself to corruption. It lends itself to all the things that Casey's just described.
Yeah, although, I mean, I think the analogy works in many ways, particularly in that sense that there was once this, you know, in some respects, lowercase l, and certainly economically liberal establishment centre-right basis, which would have been sort of the old East Coast elite in the US, and in UK would have been sort of One Nation Tories, who, you know, it turned out were either completely ineffective or utterly craven when it came to having a choice between, you know, do you endorse the monstrous populist, or do you actually stand up for some kind of constitutional liberal principle? Well, guess what they did? You know, are you prepared to endorse all kinds of crazy paranoid stuff about some leftist threat if you get some tax cuts thrown in? Yes, turns out you are, right? So that's a sort of a similar dynamic that's happened. But there is a very big difference, which is that, you know, first of all, the Tories, Boris Johnson imploded all of his own without the electorate having to actually intervene very much. And he was a very important figure for the Brexitization of the Conservative Party. But also, Brexit, you know, got done in a way that was just too conspicuously, you know, unsuccessful in delivering any of the things that had been promised for it. And the Conservatives couldn't sort of rally back around it in the way that the Republicans were able to rally around Trump 2.0. And also, you know, even more important than that, Brexit was such a colossal delusion of nationalism because it rested on the presumption that the UK could be great again as essentially in sort of a neo-imperial world colossus. It was founded in an idea of the UK that was completely outmoded and resided in essentially sort of pre-war ideas of British greatness. Now, unfortunately, actually, the US really is a superpower. So you can actually sort of get away with the type of Brexit rhetoric that MAGA was in the US context, because actually it is, you know, militarily, economically, it's a continent, right? You can get a lot more out of MAGA than you were ever going to get out of Brexit as a project.
Casey, finally, in the middle of the conversation, Raph raised the idea of the urbanization of America, that you end up with a kind of managed democracy. That if you successfully fix the justice system, the media was on your side anyway. The Supreme Courts have been packed and aligned with what you want. But more importantly, the surrounding culture is pointing in your direction. You're kind of a democracy in name only. This has been the fear for America. Do you think, are we on that road? How likely is it? Are we heading towards that destination, or is this just me having nightmares?
This is the hard part, right? Where we always look back at previous eras of what worked, what didn't, why did things fail? And there's always points where you say, how did they not see this coming? Like it was inevitable, right? Like they're dumb if they ignored that. But when you're living in the moment, it is really hard to look at like, where was the actual breakdown point? It's not like an alarm bell fell or a dam broke and all of a sudden you're drowning. It is these incremental steps that just lessen the guardrails of democracy that be carried out over a period of years and decades. And then all of a sudden you look back and you have no idea what system you have anymore. And I think we're on that trend where what we used to take for granted is now no longer taken. We're having conversations about the 22nd Amendment, right? Like, what are we talking about even more? And so there are tons of signs. And if you look at folks who study historical breakdowns or democratic backsliding, we're ringing a lot of alarm bells, from the distrust of institutions as a means of taking power over those institutions, from outright calling the media the enemy or the traitor class, to literally looking at your opposition and delegitimizing their chance at holding power, that the only way they can win is if they cheat. And then we start talking about each other or other parties as the enemy, as traitorous, as scum. Like, these are tried and true authoritarian, backsliding, democracy killing type efforts. And then when you start going after the institutions themselves, right? Gerrymandering explicitly rather than the typical American model of doing it underhandedly, that's different, right? Like, if you're doing it from the commander in chief saying, go find me these seats, go find me 11,000 votes in Georgia, we're ringing a lot of alarm bells. What I'm looking for, if you're looking for like what is the definition of a constitutional crisis, it is that if the Supreme Court makes a ruling and Donald Trump outright and explicitly ignores it. That is my definition of a constitutional breakdown. We ain't there yet, but that doesn't mean it's just a binary thing, right? It is an incremental type of degradation of these institutions, and we've obviously been doing that for a decade plus now.
And that is the end of the show, which means it's time for Escape Routes. What are the books, films, TV, music, and miscellaneous that are providing us with shelter from the political storm, which from this episode we really, really need? Raph, Behr, what's your escape route this week?
Well, last weekend, I live in Brighton, a fine city on the south coast of England, for our transatlantic listeners. Last weekend, I went to the Brighton Pride Festival, which is one of the biggest in the UK, one of the original in the world. And one of the headlining acts was Andy Bell, half of Erasure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd forgotten what a fantastic band Erasure are. They're still going. And just quite how many bands they have. I mean, obviously, I've got the Erasure Greatest Hits, and I remember from late 80s, about 1988, was it? They,
yeah.
Stop, Love to Hate You, obviously Respect. It was absolute anthem after anthem. And I thought, you know what? Erasure just they are not adequately held up in the pantheon of popular music from the 1980s at a level I think they deserve.
So you're saying stop the Erasure?
Exactly.
Erasure
exactly
are brilliant.
Literally what I'm saying. Just a little respect
for
please.
Erasure.
For
yes,
Erasure.
Absolutely. Good choice. Casey Burger, what's your escape route?
Same thing. Music cures, right? I went to a concert with some buddies. It was a perfect night. It was outdoors, Lumineers in a huge NFL football stadium.
Oh, wow.
And it was magical. It was a magical night, kind of just restore the bucket, fill the bucket back up. And it was good. It was a good escape with some people.
So for the listeners who don't know who Lumineers are, give us the quick, I'm going to make you do some music journalism now. Give us the quick summary.
Google it. You got all the information at your fingertips.
No.
Go look at their best songs.
Your personal impression. How would you describe them to someone who didn't know?
Folksy country with a little bit. They do some rocking out too. I mean, they're just talented. They're talented folks. Go press play. You got infinite access. You'll like them.
There you go. It's easy. Right, my escape routes. I've got several. I'm going to do them quickly. Obviously, I went to see The Fantastic Four, a film I've been waiting to see for 50 years. Does not disappoint at all. It's got all the colour, optimism and heart and craziness that made it the world's greatest comics magazine. Fantastic Galactus, played by Finchy from The Office, who does not throw a shoe over a pub, but does attempt to devour the Earth. You've got to see it. I loved it as much as I loved Superman, which was maybe a little bit too packed with characters, but again, just had that optimism and that heart. My music choice is by the band Saint Etienne, who I have loved for years, and they've got a new album coming out called International, and it's going to be their final album. They are packing it in after over 30 years, and I'm rather sad about this, but the two singles that you can hear are just brilliant. One is called Glad, and it's produced by friend of the podcast, Tom Rowlands from the Chemical Brothers. And the other is called Take Me to the Pilot, and it's produced by friend of the podcast, Paul Hartnell from Orbital. So in many senses, it's Oh God, What Now, the pop album. It's called International. It's coming out, I think, early September. And when it comes out, I will have a tear in my eye, but a great swelling of pride in my heart. And that is the end of the show. Thank you, Casey Burgat.
Thank you.
And thank you, Rafael Behr.
Always a pleasure.
Listeners, we hope you enjoy the new deep dives at the start of the week. A bit less play-by-play politics, which even we can find a little bit grinding. A bit more on the bigger ideas. It means we can concentrate on the important newsy stuff on Fridays. Don't forget, give us a 5-star review on your favourite app. We always forget to remind listeners to do that. And please do think about backing us on Patreon. There's a link in the show notes. And if you need a little more listening right now, don't miss the latest Talk 90s to Me on Nirvana with Miranda Sawyer. Again, link in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you at the end of the week.